There's something undeniably magical about a weekend camping trip with friends. The promise of fresh air, the scent of pine, and the crackle of a campfire under a starry sky. These are the things that draw us back to nature. My friends and I had been planning this trip for weeks, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of the woods. Our group consisted of 5 close friends: Alex, the adventurous spirit who always led our expeditions; Jenna, the practical one with a knack for setting up camp; Mark, the joker whose humor kept our spirits high; Sarah, the storyteller who could spin a yarn that would send shivers down your spine; and me, the observer, soaking in the camaraderie and the beauty of the wilderness. We decided on a secluded lake we had heard about from a fellow hiker. It was said to be pristine, far from the usual camping spots, and perfect for a weekend getaway. The journey to the lake was a hike through dense forest, but the promise of solitude and the serene beauty of the lake kept us motivated. When we finally arrived, the sight took our breath away. The lake was a shimmering mirror reflecting the surrounding trees and the clear blue sky above. We found a flat, grassy spot near the water's edge and quickly set up our tents. The sun was still high, casting a warm, golden light over everything. We spent the afternoon swimming in the cool, clear water and exploring the nearby trails. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, we gathered around the campfire Alex had expertly built. The transition from day to night brought a palpable change in the atmosphere. The vibrant sounds of daytime, bird song, rustling leaves, the occasional splash of a fish, gave way to the quiet hum of the forest at night. The sky darkened, and a canopy of stars emerged, twinkling above us. The night had fully descended upon us, the campfire our only source of light and warmth. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the trees surrounding our campsite, creating an atmosphere ripe for ghost stories. Sarah was in her element, weaving a tale about a haunted house at the edge of town. Her voice was low and dramatic, pulling us into the spooky narrative. We laughed and teased each other, trying to shake off the chill that Sarah's stories inevitably brought. The night air was cool, and we huddled closer to the fire, savoring the warmth. The stars above were brilliant, twinkling in the inky black sky, and the moon cast a silvery glow over the lake, making it look almost magical. As Sarah finished another spine-chilling story, we sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound. It was then that we first heard it, a faint whisper, almost imperceptible, drifting through the trees. We exchanged puzzled glances, straining our ears to catch the sound. "It's just the wind," Mark said with a nervous chuckle, trying to break the tension. We nodded, though the sound had seemed too distinct to be mere wind. We returned to our conversations, but the whispers continued, growing slightly louder and more persistent. At first, we tried to ignore them, dismissing them as a trick of our minds influenced by the ghost stories. But as the minutes passed, the whispers became harder to ignore. They seemed to be coming from all directions, a soft murmur that filled the night air. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping and blending together, speaking in a language we couldn't understand. A shiver ran down my spine, and I noticed Jenna glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Alex nodded, his eyes scanning the dark forest beyond the reach of our firelight. "It's just the wind," Mark repeated, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to communicate something. The once peaceful and serene forest now felt oppressive and foreboding. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, made us jumpy and anxious. The sense of being watched, of unseen eyes observing our every move, was almost palpable. The whispers had a quality that was almost hypnotic, like a dozen voices speaking all at once, but not in unison. They were layered, overlapping in a dissonant chorus that seemed to ebb and flow with the breeze. Sometimes they were soft, barely more than a breath, and other times they surged, pressing in on us from all sides. It was impossible to tell what they were saying, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. We huddled closer together, our attempts to reassure each other growing increasingly hollow. Alex tried to distract us with more stories, but his voice wavered, betraying his own unease. Mark's jokes fell flat, and Jenna kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the whispers crescendoed, a cacophony of indistinct voices that seemed to vibrate through the very air around us. We all froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was then that we realized one of us was missing. "Where's Sarah?" Jenna's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes darting around the campfire. Panic surged through us as we frantically scanned the darkness. "Sarah?" Alex called out, his voice cracking with fear. There was no response, only the relentless whispering. We scattered, searching the immediate area with our flashlights, calling her name over and over. The forest seemed to swallow our voices, the trees standing silent and unmoving as if they were complicit in Sarah's disappearance. My heart pounded in my chest, and every shadow seemed to hide some lurking threat. "Sarah!" Mark shouted, his voice echoing through the still night. But there was no reply, only the eerie whispers that seemed to mock our desperation. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, we heard a rustling in the bushes near the edge of the lake. We turned our flashlights in that direction, the beams cutting through the darkness to reveal Sarah stumbling towards us. She looked pale and terrified, her eyes wide with a fear I had never seen before. "Sarah!" Jenna rushed to her, wrapping her arms around her in a tight hug. "What happened? Where were you?" Sarah sat by the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. The terror in her eyes was unmistakable as she recounted her harrowing experience. "I was just a few steps away from the camp," she began, her voice trembling. "I thought I heard someone calling my name, so I went to check. But when I got to the lake, I saw them. Dark figures, like shadows, moving around the water. Their eyes were glowing. We listened in stunned silence, the whispers around us growing louder, almost as if they were reacting to her words. They kept whispering my name," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind, but it was too clear, too insistent. They wanted me to follow them into the water. I felt this overwhelming urge to go, but something held me back. I don't know what it was, but I turned and ran as fast as I could." A cold chill ran through all of us as we absorbed her story. The reality of our situation sank in. We were facing something supernatural, something far beyond our understanding. The whispers, the dark figures, the eerie feeling of being watched. It all pointed to a sinister presence lurking in the woods. Alex, usually the brave leader of our group, looked visibly shaken. "We can't let our guard down," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Whatever is out there, it's trying to lure us in. We need to stay awake and stick together." Mark, usually the jokester, was uncharacteristically silent, his face pale. Jenna clung to Sarah, her eyes darting nervously around the campfire. The oppressive darkness beyond the circle of light seemed to press in on us, filled with unseen threats. "We need to keep the fire going," Alex continued. "It's the only thing keeping them at bay. No one goes anywhere alone, and we stay within the light." We all nodded in agreement, the fear binding us together in our resolve to survive the night. The fire crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows that danced on the trees. The whispers continued, sometimes soft and almost soothing, other times loud and urgent, like a chorus of malevolent voices just beyond our sight. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. We huddled close to the fire, our eyes wide and alert, scanning the darkness for any sign of the figures. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent our hearts racing. The fear was palpable, a living, breathing entity that gripped us tightly. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. Our eyes grew heavy, our bodies weary from the adrenaline and tension. But none of us dared to sleep, knowing that to close our eyes was to invite the shadows in. Sarah's recounting of her encounter had solidified our understanding of the threat we faced. We were not alone in these woods, and whatever was out there was far from benign. The whispers and the figures were a reminder that we were intruders in a place where we did not belong. We watched the horizon anxiously, waiting for the first light of dawn. The darkness felt endless, an oppressive shroud that seemed determined to swallow us whole. But we clung to our fire, to each other, and to the hope that daylight would bring safety. As the first light of dawn began to break through the dense canopy, a collective sigh of relief swept through our group. The whispers had finally ceased, retreating with the darkness, but the terror they left behind was palpable. We wasted no time in packing up our campsite, our movements hurried and frantic. There was an unspoken agreement that we needed to leave immediately, to put as much distance between ourselves and this cursed place as possible. The morning air was cold and crisp, carrying the fresh scent of pine and damp earth, but it did little to calm our frayed nerves. Each of us was lost in our thoughts, the events of the night replaying in our minds with relentless clarity. The once idyllic lake now seemed sinister, its calm surface hiding unfathomable depths of fear. We worked in silence, our usual banter replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet. Sarah's face was still pale, her eyes wide and haunted. Jenna stayed close to her, occasionally glancing over her shoulder as if expecting the shadows to reappear. Mark's usual jovial expression was gone, replaced by a somber look that mirrored the gravity of our situation. Alex, our fearless leader, moved with a sense of urgency, his jaw set in determination. As we packed the last of our gear, Alex gathered us together. "We need to make a pact," he said, his voice low but firm. "We never speak of this place again. Whatever we encountered here, it needs to stay here." Agreed? We all nodded, the gravity of his words sinking in. The forest, once a place of adventure and freedom, had turned into a nightmare that none of us wanted to relive. We shouldered our packs and began the hike back to civilization, each step taking us further from the horrors of the night. The journey back was arduous, but we pressed on, driven by the need to escape. The forest, which had seemed so inviting on our way in, now felt like a maze of shadows and hidden dangers. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made us jump, our nerves stretched to their limits. When we finally reached the trailhead, a collective wave of relief washed over us. The sight of our cars, parked just as we had left them, felt like a lifeline. We loaded our gear in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the tree line, half expecting to see dark figures watching us leave. Days turned into weeks, and the events of that night continued to haunt us. I found myself plagued by nightmares, the whispers echoing in my mind, the dark figures lurking just beyond my sight. Simple sounds, the wind rustling through the trees, the creak of floorboards at night, would send my heart racing, transporting me back to that campsite by the lake. We tried to move on with our lives, but the fear lingered, a constant shadow that followed us. We stayed in touch, offering each other support and reassurance, but the bond we shared had been irrevocably changed. The terror we faced had left its mark, and though we never spoke of it, the memory of that night was always there, just beneath the surface. I often wonder what would have happened if we had ignored the whispers, if we had stayed asleep and unaware of the lurking danger. But those thoughts are fleeting, quickly replaced by the overwhelming gratitude that we escaped with our lives. We never returned to that place, and I doubt we ever will. The forest, with its hidden horrors and whispered secrets, is a chapter we have closed, a dark memory we keep locked away. But even now, years later, the fear remains, a silent companion that reminds us of the fragility of our safety and the unseen terrors that lurk in the shadows.